So typically when yogis would encounter one another on the path, they would, instead of asking how are you doing, they'll ask you how far along are you in your self-realization, and you're on your path back to God and in your spiritual advancement. So instead of asking you how you are all doing, I hope all of you are doing wonderful this evening. And I just want to acknowledge the sincerity of all of you, and offer my gratitude to all of you, because not just for showing up to our program, but just being here at a temple, at a monastery, to learn about spiritual truth is a sign of your sincerity walking the spiritual path. So very grateful for all of you. Very grateful for Jesse for coming through. This is my brother right here, all the tattoos. Spent some time in the monastery with us actually for a few months here. But now has his own tattoo shop in Arizona. It's always good having you here though. Yeah, pronounce. Madhavapuri, pronounce Prabhu. Nice to see you. He was also a monk here. It's like a little reunion. Unexpected. In fact, we had another monk just here this morning, Braj Mohan, that we haven't seen in 2 years. So really, it does feel like a reunion. I thought that perhaps this evening we would speak a little bit on fulfillment, because I feel like in the times that we're living in, society, the external world, demands so much of us that it's very easy to fall into that cycle of just fulfilling the day-to-day needs, the essentials, where it's work or it's school or it's taking care of your duties, whatever that may be. And sometimes through it all, we feel a sense of emptiness if it's not connected to a deep purpose. And so, like, what really gives fulfillment to the soul, to the self? Would anybody like to answer that or give any input? What gives fulfillment? I know some of you have some things. Yes, indeed, spiritual truth gives the highest fulfillment. Connor, yes.
You know, it's like money doesn't buy happiness, but nobody's ever frowned on a jet ski.
Shh, I'm right there with you. I mean, I've heard that people say, I heard the saying that says, like, people who say money can't buy happiness don't know where to shop. So you're right. No.
It's a bad answer, I know.
You got us somewhere, though. Any other ideas on what gives fulfillment?
I was thinking temporary pleasures don't mean lasting fulfillment.
Right. 6. So material things can give temporary pleasure. Fulfillment. It's fulfillment, but it doesn't last. Sure. Right. It's not everlasting fulfillment. Sure.
Money doesn't bring that.
Money doesn't bring out. Just how this world works.
What if those temporary fulfillments help build the foundation for a lasting one as well? I thought I'd bring that up.
Those temporary fulfillments. Huh.
Give an example.
Yeah, could you give an example?
Sex in a relationship, for example. I think that's an important part of any functioning relationship. Of a romantic sort, I suppose,
Mhm.
from my perspective.
Right. If that
Marital or otherwise.
if that engagement is connected to a higher spiritual purpose, can give the highest fulfillment. Sure. If it's all part of the greater plan of raising Krishna conscious or God conscious children, then it can give fulfillment in that sense. And we're speaking of spiritual fulfillment, something that's inherent, something that's transcendental, you know. Yeah, I think that we're going to speak about a little bit about material fulfillment, because sometimes we are caught up in an occupation or something that we're studying in school that we don't really align with it, you know. And I feel like anybody who's really ever questioned life, questioned their situation, their circumstances, pondered upon, you know, what really gives me fulfillment, and what is something that we are just so. And so in the Eastern text, in the Bhagavad Gita, you know, Krishna speaks a lot about Dharma. When we realign with our essential purpose in this world, and he explains two kinds of dharmas. One is just our material duty, meaning there's certain things that just gives deep satisfaction to ourselves, for our minds, physically. It's almost like we were born to do it. Like I know some artists, they're just so good at what they do, or some cooks who are just so talented, and they get into the kitchen and they'll just create the most beautiful and sumptuous things. Or engineers who could spend all day working on code, and it's somewhere along the lines it's intrinsic to them. And so if it's something that's really connected with our material dharma, then it's probably a good sign that we should do that. You know, we can fully invest ourselves and really there's a sense of deep satisfaction from that. And so if we're questioning, you know, whether or not we feel dissatisfied or unhappy, then we have to ask ourselves, can I really see myself doing this for the long term? So that's Dharma from one perspective. From a material perspective, what can give external fulfillment and satisfaction. But Dharma from a spiritual perspective, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita explains that the highest yoga in this world is to link in yoga with him, and it's to connect that each soul has a very intrinsic nature, and that nature is to love. And what gives the highest fulfillment to the self is simply to love and be loved. And when we see in this world what people are most seeking after, it's relationships. Fulfillment in our relationships with our families, with our loved ones, with our significant other. And that's only because it's rooted in our relationship with the divine. And the highest yoga is to connect with Krishna, to connect with God in love. And because that's the very nature of the self, it gives the highest satisfaction. So Krishna, the word Rama in this mantra, means the reservoir of all pleasure. And so when we're linking ourselves to that pleasure. We can fulfill a satisfaction, an ecstasy, something that's otherworldly, something that's beyond any pleasure this world can offer. So who agrees with that? That, yeah, for sure. The real yoga is, I think I've heard one of our spiritual teachers say that Bhakti is the path that we practice. Bhakti yoga is the path of, it's the yoga of relationships. And we see, like, once we have that deep connection and form spiritual connection with Krishna, then it really seeps through all of our relationships in life. Everything from the external world to our relationships with others, and the world really
The yoga of tolerance also. You have to tolerate all this noise.
the yoga tolerance. We do a lot of that kind of yoga here in PB. Yeah, sometimes right here, our neighbors are allowing us to practice that kind of yoga, especially like on July 4th. Yeah, that's the yoga of relationships. And yeah, when we keep Krishna in the center, then everything just starts to become so much more beautiful. So, just a few thoughts on the concept of Dharma and fulfillment. Would anybody like to give any additions or questions?
When it comes to spiritual practice, does that ever interfere in other material relationships with legal systems, for example? So something I did most recently was, and I'll have to use a bit of technical language to bridge the understanding, but in essence there was quite a long story. There was a tenement building in Santa Ana, if you know where that is, since down past OC where I live, and there were 30 to 40 homeless people staying in there, and at that current moment they were either going to be thrown out onto the streets and given social workers, which in my experience in that area strips them of their freedom and strips them of their rights, etc., and isn't fair to them, or expedites them to jail for trespassing should they be caught in those buildings. And so what I did to delay the process by which we can find them permanent housing and a permanent place to stay was it's almost irrelevant to the story, but to show you the lengths I went, maybe it can be considered spiritual. I got silicified dolomite and 40 milligrams potassium bromide and 300 kilograms per centimeter in a vacuum pressure container, and I put it into the light water cooled reactor and serpentinized the minerals and effervesced this gelatinous compound, which I cooled and crushed and extracted for asbestos and placed it in an air duct, waited for their building air inspectors to arrive, and once they left, I came back and cleared it out with polyethylene sheets and HEPA filters. And in essence, this fooled them into thinking that they can no longer tear down the building because it's unsafe, when really I brought everybody back in, and they can now they're staying in one of the hotels. But isn't that spiritual? I mean, thank you. Isn't that spiritual in that I'm doing something of service to somebody else? What is? Can you describe that more fully for me? Because that's illegal what I did, and I'm just admitting to a crime.
Yeah. Where was this again?
Oh, cheers.
Santa Ana? Dude, that's rad. Is that spiritual?
Okay.
I'm a little bewildered right now. it's
You know, this brings me back to something my buddy Ben was telling me about. He was actually picked up the Gita last night and was reading it for some reason. He just had the urge, and he was upset that, you know, Krishna basically convinced Arjuna to do the wrong, the socially wrong thing, and to fight his family, but sometimes you got to.
One of our monks.
It's a mode of goodness. It's good that you did that. You like to help people. That's a mode of goodness, but it's not spiritual. It's not spiritual. So it doesn't, I mean, mode of goodness, it gives like a boost. It can give you a boost to actually doing spiritual things. But it's still on the, you're helping the material body of the people there. To actually, if you want to really help someone, you help them by giving them spiritual knowledge. Like he's speaking spiritual knowledge. We have the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that you're lamenting for your family members. Now, some people can't understand this. Why is Krishna, why is God trying to convince someone to fight, his family? Why? Well, they happen to be on the wrong side. And then Krishna explains that you're lamenting for the body, but nobody is their body. Everybody is a spirit soul. No one dies. So this is spiritual knowledge. We try to help people understand their spiritual life. You might put them give them facility to live in that house, but in that house they do all kinds of nonsense, taking drugs and doing all kinds of illicit things. So it doesn't really help them ultimately. So spiritual activities, it helps someone ultimately in their journey to Krishna.
It's well said. That's more or less what I would say. It's actually one of our gurus in our lineage. He's one of the most prominent teachers in the last century, and he goes by the name of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he stated a very revolutionary statement. What he did was revolutionary too. Don't get me wrong, that was pretty. But he explains how even if we establish so many hospitals, like what good would that do if there's no hospitals for curing the real material disease, which is birth, death, old age, and disease? If it doesn't have anything connected to transcendence, better to open up a temple. And so it's quite bold, but if you can connect, if you can be a part of some sort of revolutionary spiritual engagement, which there's many of it are even within the ashram, the monastery, you could even call it a preaching grounds for activists. I consider myself a spiritual activist, and when I'm going out there, I'm not just sharing literature. I'm revolting against the material consciousness that this world is so much immersed in, and I'm just trying to be an instrument in sharing another perception of life. So I really appreciate your revolutionary spirit and your intentions. But yes, if it can be connected to a spiritual purpose, it will bring the highest fulfillment. Sure. Any other comments or questions? Yeah.
I just wanted to say about earlier you mentioned about sex in a relationship, about bringing everlasting happiness. Sorry, about bringing everlasting happiness. About that being kind of an example of something which is a temporary thing, which builds the foundation for lasting happiness. Still on the material platform, even if something might be healthy for some material arrangement, for example, or a romantic relationship, still that entire material arrangement will eventually kind of fizzle, So I guess in that particular example, sex in a relationship, yes, it helps build the relationship, but the relationship itself is temporary. So that was my thought on that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, something, Daniel?
Just kind of relating to Alex right here. I was kind of thinking, like, a lot of people, I'm saying not everybody, but a lot of people like coffee, right? It's caffeine, it helps you get in the morning. You take one cup a day and you're good to go. But if you think of it in the sense that when you drink coffee, let's say 1 cup a day, then after a while you start to feel more sleepy. So you're like, oh, you know what? Let me take another cup of coffee. So now you have 2 cups of coffee a day, right? So now you're wanting more and more coffee at the end of the day, and you're like, why am I still tired? And so it's the same sense that when you overload those sensories in your body, you're overstimulating. You're constantly doing this, and you're inhibiting your body to be like, oh, you know what? It's okay, so I can get more and more. But then there's a point, there's just a limit. Your body just can't take anymore, and you just collapse one day. So think of that as just like when you oversensitize your senses, then you're not really getting fulfillment. You're getting material fulfillment, and that's in my stance. Like I don't know if anybody else would agree, but I just think of it as like coffee.
Sure. Mm. Tyler.
Damodara, thank you for a wonderful talk. This begs the question, it's more open-ended, is how do we achieve eternal fulfillment, and what does that look like?
How do we achieve eternal fulfillment? By engaging in an authentic yoga practice.
Jai.
Yeah, the real yoga means to link with the divine. And it just makes life so much more beautiful. Like I said, well, we're all seeking love. In the Shastra, it says that the Atma is Ananda Vyasat, meaning that it's pleasure seeking by nature. Because our very essence, when we strip down the material body, we're essentially, our spirit is comprised of these characteristics, which is eternality, of ecstasy, bliss, and knowledge. And that cannot be experienced to the highest extent from anything of this external world. It can only be accessed by being accessed within. And that's when we engage through love for Krishna. It's much more intrinsic, and it's something that's not tangible for the senses. It's not visible through the eyes. It's something that you feel in your heart. It's something that you feel in your spirit. It's something that when you taste, you become maddened with eagerness, with yearning to attain it once again. And the more you advance on the path, the more that eagerness and longing just grows. And the more you're away from it, the more heartbroken you become. So I think that through a true process of yoga, through bhakti, we can experience the highest fulfillment when we're engaging properly in love with Krishna. So anything else? Okay, so grateful that all of you came this evening. Stay tuned. We will be hosting a bonfire soon and another yoga retreat. So if you'd like to get updated on those events, you can follow our Instagram. We have all of our information there, or social media, Facebook, whatever. But please stick around. We'll be serving a nice vegan dinner. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Hare Krishna.